And we are live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Global Citizens. My name is Calvin. I am the show's host, and I am, of course, its creator. So, my guest for today is actually, if you notice in the description, there's actually a quote. Your natural working style and personality is probably not wrong, but in overseas markets, it is probably not right. Take the time to understand different working style and learn to adapt. So my guest for today is actually Mr. Kyle Hegarty. So Kyle is actually the author of Accidental Business Nomad, a book about the funny, tragic, expensive mistakes pretty much everybody makes when working across foreign markets. So he is also delivering team communication program that help people figure out how to work more effectively within global remote teams and with clients around the world. So, in short, you need somebody to find, hire, train, manage teams across cultures. You go and find him first. Oh, and just quite a fun fact: this is written in his LinkedIn. He does triathlon. It's part of his LinkedIn, guys. I'm not bluffing you. So take that away. So, Kyle, how are you, my friend?
Hey, good morning. I'm not doing triathlons these days with lockdown and everything. I have a bike in the background here, but that's as close to a triathlon as I'm getting. Watching my bike collect dust.
If you need somebody to help out with that maintenance, let me know. I think I know a guy or two who actually
That
does
needs it. I need to
maintenance
ride
work.
it before it needs to get maintained. The rider needs help. It's not the bike this time. I can't blame the bike.
Well, now we know
But
what Lance
thank you
Armstrong
for
say might not work.
yeah. Well,
Sorry.
thank you for inviting me
Yeah,
this
yeah.
morning.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for making the time. Okay. For those of you who are watching this for the very first time, Global Citizens is an online platform whereby I invited people who has experienced the life of a global citizens. So primarily, we advocated third culture kids since I am one. But along with that, I've also had individuals who had represented the mindset perspective of digital nomads or even an expatriate or any other variations of that. The reason being is that I want people to understand that this is not an extended holiday, it's not a vacation whereby because you spend time in a place known for its tourism spot. This is a life whereby somebody has to learn to change who they are, how they speak, their perspective. It's because sometimes the way that they operated might not be accepted in a new country, which is I think summarized by a quote that was done by Kyle actually. So without further ado, I will just jump into the very first question and pass him the spotlight again. So Kyle, the first question is kind of compulsory for those of you who already live abroad for a very, very long time. Some people like it, some people hate it. I don't really know how people feel eventually, but this is my show, so I do whatever I want.
That's right.
So thank you. So where is home to you? So is it still the good old United States of America, or in a sense, Singapore has managed to etch a certain place in your heart also?
Yeah, I think it's pieces. My wife is from the UK. My kids were both born here in Singapore. I've been in Singapore or living, I guess, in Singapore for 15 years, so it's quite some time. But I actually don't really feel like Singapore is home. I suppose deep down, the U.S. is still home. Interestingly enough, though, I don't feel that draw to go back. I still want to get out and explore other places. So I think that I guess deep down the U.S. would be home, but it's interesting because I always like going back, but there's a feeling of restlessness. I don't think I could see myself replanting back there anytime soon.
Yeah, that is quite common actually. I once invited Heather Hansen, who
Yes,
actually in her oh wait, I believe you're familiar with
yeah,
each
I
other,
know
right?
Heather. Yes,
Yep, lovely lady. For Heather's, she actually has told me before for her case is because she has never spent anywhere within her age of her adulthood in the US. So when
Right.
she came back to the US and her home is in California, she was dealing with so much stress, and that is just trying to pay her groceries with a
Right.
credit card. So
Right.
everybody, because everybody was so curious, is because I think it was in Walmart or Target, I can't remember. So she was given a promotional campaign or something, and she's like, "No, I don't want it. I don't want it. I don't live here." She's like, "Wait,
Right.
what?" And everybody
Yeah.
was asking her, "So where do you live?" "Oh, it can be applied in over 50 states in the United States."
Yeah.
"No,
Right.
I
Right.
don't live in the
Yeah.
United States." So,
I'm 7,000
uh,
miles away. It's
yes,
funny.
exactly.
Growing or spending so much time in a different part of the world, weird things happen because you go through different stages of your life. So as I said, I have kids who were born here in Singapore, and so the entire language, the words about having kids, the prams, the buggies, the nappies, the vocabulary of having all this stuff that you need for kids is very different than every word I just listed isn't a common U.S. expression. And so the times I would go back, we would be here I am in my strong American accent, but then not having the normal words, is kind of this weird things that made you stand out as sort of a foreigner in your own land. And it's probably what she was going through as well to that degree. I think as a third culture kid, which I'm not, you introduced yourself as, and my kids are, that's a
Yes.
totally different experience because here they are with their American passports who have never lived in America. A few years ago, we were back in Boston. I think one of my sons was 5, and we were walking down the street of Boston, and he pointed, he said, "Look, Daddy, they have Starbucks in this country." It's like,
Starbucks is from that country, young man.
yeah, and I tried to explain that, but from his worldview, that's a Singapore company, you know what I mean? Like that's what he's used to.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, and I think that's very cool. But I think I could also see that being stressful and difficult if you do end up moving into different places because your norms are different than the norms, and it's probably kids don't deal with that, or other kids might wrestle with that, but it creates your own tribe to a degree. So you become a citizen of that tribe rather than a country that was established X amount of centuries or years ago, that by a couple dudes with a map. So what's the difference?
How young are your kids now?
10 and 6, 10 and 7.
10 and 7. Okay.
Yeah.
For your eldest, once he hit usually 12 or 13 years old, give me a call. He is gonna start questioning a lot,
Yeah, I
and
bet.
a lot.
I
I
bet.
mean, a lot.
No, it's an interesting. I mean, because your question of where are you from is, or where do you, deep down, that's certainly a more important or interesting question for a third culture kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That is. Of course, why I asked that of even somebody as yourself who actually move only as an adult though. Because the thing is that there are cases whereby people actually start feeling detached from their home. So for your case though, have you ever experienced something called a reverse culture shock when you actually entered a new home? Sorry, when you return back home and then you're like, okay, I don't recognize this part of Boston that I actually grew up in. So do you
Mm.
ever have such experience though?
I have, yeah. If I think about it, almost from, well, maybe this is one example, but there's living in a place for a while and then just forgetting how to get around, right? So I can't, I mentally can't see some of the paths. I'd have to look at a map to do what I used to do on a daily basis, which is kind of a weird feeling. To me, reverse culture shock also happens when you go back into a situation where there's behavior that was totally normal in that place, but you've been in another part and that's totally different. Simple example is wearing shoes inside. My kids would come home to or back into the US and the UK, And the idea of walking into somebody's home with your shoes on is a foreign concept, whereas it's totally normal in the other parts of the world. And you always know where my kids are because you can see their little shoes outside, and they'd be the only ones taking their shoes off.
Okay, I didn't expect that. I didn't expect to hear that, but yeah, that does happen. That does happen.
I think the
Okay,
other thing the thing that I think about a lot in the work setting is the communication styles that are different. And I'm doing some work with companies right now where they're Western, they're not even American companies, but the management style and the communication style is so different than here in, say, Singapore. So there's a client, they've hired 2 people from Singapore, they're now reporting to Europeans, and their experience is a totally different. That's a culture shock as well. Their expectations in terms of communicating what they're doing on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis are very different working in a European or certainly an American organization compared to what they came from, which in this case was a Singaporean organization. And I'd heard this expression. It was the first time I had heard it just last week, which was it's a Chinese phrase. I don't know the Chinese, but it translates roughly as communication costs or communication cost. And the idea is that if you are communicating with your boss, that's costing money or time, and time is money. You should be working instead on, in this case, selling. So the communication, so communicating internally is viewed out as almost a necessary. I don't want to say necessary evil, but as something that should be done only when there is something specific to communicate. Right. And that is a very different mindset than a lot of the companies that I'm used to working with in the West, who are trying to create this nurturing collaboration environment where people are talking and just putting ideas out just to test and get some feelings and feedback and have things kind of evolve that way. Whereas what, in this case, these individuals were used to, you speak to your boss when you've got a deal to report, and otherwise, get back to work. And those are two very different working styles. And if that's not discussed and understood and worked around, you get some very unhappy team dynamics. And that's when people leave. That's when work doesn't go very well. And that's when you start losing money. So, going back to the themes of my book, it's like you use that word, expensive mistakes. Like, these are kind of these weird soft moments that actually end up causing sometimes really expensive problems.
All right. We definitely will link it back to that particular area again of communication costs. But I actually would love to now dive into, of course, the main area, of course, how I actually got to know you. So I actually got to know you from a contact of mine, from Miss Kritika Van Hunen. So Kritika is actually currently in Netherlands. She actually followed your book, and she actually mentioned to me, "Hey, do you know that there's actually somebody who is actually reaching out about diversity and culture, and he's actually living in Singapore. So do you mind telling us a little bit more about the accidental business nomad, and of course some of the life lessons that you've actually learned from it? Because I actually recall there's one part of the chapter when you actually made a fatal mistake because you don't know the difference between Singapore's culture and what it is in the United States.
So I moved here in 2006, and I set up my own marketing business. And our business focuses on building sales pipelines for other companies. Right. And most of our clients were Western companies who were looking to expand across Southeast Asia. And so I was trying to grow this business across the region, and at the same time help my clients grow their business across the region. And so I was right in the middle of this flood of foreign companies trying to expand and hire and grow. And the biggest takeaway that I had throughout those years was how important the cultural variations were, and to be able to understand some of those differences so that you could adjust to them rather than bring your preconceived notions, your playbook from one part of the world. You can't just cut and paste it into another part of the world. And to this day, I see companies still doing that same, making those same mistakes, whether it's their style of hiring and interviewing and then managing and then training. All of these approaches that might work in one part of the world can end up actually having the opposite impact on other parts of the world. And so over the years, as I've wrestled through all of this and hopefully figured some things out, I still haven't figured everything out. But to see this repeated mistakes, there was enough patterns out there that I felt was a good story to tell, because it was important now more than ever as companies, because of digitalization, because companies are now more, I think as the digital transformation has been happening in the last 15 years, companies more and more are working across borders and across with different people. So I think that there's more of an importance of understanding these differences now than ever before. That was all before COVID. And I would argue that COVID has just launched that. It's like accelerated all of this stuff by tenfold in terms of the fact that, now we are, instead of a airplane ride away, we're the click of a button. 2.5 years ago, very few people knew what Zoom was. Now everybody knows what it is, and we can be connected instantaneously. And because of that instantaneous connection, now you've got a heck of a lot more communication going on. And of course, the more communication going on, the more opportunities for misunderstandings. And so all of this stuff is now starting to accelerate, both the good and the bad. So the timing was in many ways very good to dig into this topic about understanding some of the cultural working style differences, trying to define it in more clear ways, and then most importantly, figure out what we can all do to improve upon that so that we can all figure out how to make this stuff work together.
Right. Okay. Earlier you mentioned on the digitization, right? So how do you feel? Though, has pandemic impacted your industry, like what you are doing? Is because, as you mentioned, and I think several of my panelists in the past have already said of how COVID has actually accelerated everything instead of affecting anything, and I think you agree with that too. So how has
Sure.
it impacted your business personally? Because some people can transition it easily. Some people may not be able to transition it at all. In fact, I've
Yeah.
heard of people who said that they'd rather die than rely on technology. That was actually not meant to be a joke, but it actually did happen. So how has it impacted you personally? And also, what do you? Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
No. Yeah, I mean that's one big question right there. So maybe hold the second question until we get through this one. So I think so first of all, I think you said the past pandemic. I look forward to the day when we can call it a past pandemic. I think we're very much in the present, unfortunately. But I've been lucky because a lot of what I do is consulting based, and it is coaching and training based. And 2 years ago, right behind me is where my passport is, and that thing was being used every week. And there was the global road warrior type of thing. And while that was fun and exciting from time to time, it was also a bit of a grind. And so I was able to pretty seamlessly convert my work to remote. That's why I say I'm very lucky compared to other businesses that have more infrastructure. There's so many industries where you just need people at the factory, at the office to get stuff done. I was luckier than most in that regard. The other thing too is I'm here talking about communication. So If anything, it has accelerated the need for a lot of the messaging that I'm focused on. My associates in the U.S. On the marketing side, we've been working remotely since 2000, and the company went remote in 2006, 2007 in the U.S. So we made it office optional. After I had left, I was still doing global projects, but in the U.S. we went remote in 2006, I think. So we were kind of ahead of that, and so I think once from that regard, the pandemic did nothing to change our setup. So we were positioned very well for that. Obviously, we get impacted by the clients, and so you have to rethink. I think you have to rethink sales in a big way, because traditionally you would be doing more face-to-face work. Marketing is shifting a little bit there. You're not going to the networking events as much. You're not going to the trade shows, speaking engagements, which is an area that I've been focused on. So that's all had to shift. And some things work and some don't. But it's a fascinating time right now in the marketing world to think about what tactics are now working, or what new ideas are out there that haven't been explored yet. And that I always get excited about that, because while it's frustrating that I was at weirdly enough, Calvin, I was at a networking event last night, even though we're in this kind of new quasi lockdown here in Singapore where only 2 people are allowed out. I was at an event where there were 15 people, all social distanced, but it was like the first event I'd been to in a long time. And so that was kind of cool to do, but that's not going to be sustainable. And so we do have to figure out ways to be able to connect and find relevant contacts and start building relationships virtually. So these are all these cool, hopefully we keep a positive attitude about, this being an opportunity within a challenge. I don't know. There's my little morning ramble for you, but that's how I think about this stuff.
No, not at all. Not at all. But where is it? Is it at Tanjung Pagar? I know that there.
Clark Key. We were down at Clark Key. There was
that create a networking.
Yeah, it's Clark Key. They have these government kind of approved areas where you're allowed to do these events, and it worked.
Oh, it worked. Oh, I need to notify some of my contacts on that. Maybe they'll be able to meet you too. Okay.
That's right.
Cool.
Yep.
Okay. I actually want to ask regarding to. I need to piggyback one of your point on communication. Yeah. So there was an article in 2018. The requirement for a diversity manager. This was created by one of my contacts. His name is Adrian Tan, who runs his own show called the HR Tech. So
I've been on it.
Oh, you were? Oh,
it's a small world, small country.
Oh, was it? Did I miss that episode? Oh no. Okay, apologies, Adrian. Apologies about that. Okay. Well, his point was that there needs to be a manager for diversity in an office, and he actually came up with it when there was a misunderstanding when he was trying to eat in Japan. I actually want to ask you on this though, is that do you feel there should just be a diversity manager, or there should be a diversity division that could help implement diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether it's in Singapore? I know in the US there's some attempt on it already, but the thing is that it's still in an early stage.
I think that industry means it means different things in different parts of the world. So diversity in a US organization is going to have a lot different look and measurements than it would in a Singapore organization. I could go downtown and look at a group in Singapore, and it could be, people from 10 different countries. It would be the most diverse thing you've ever seen. Whereas that would be more, I guess that would be unique or less common, I may possibly in the US, but then you look at people from the US and their backgrounds are pretty diverse as well. I think about the importance of inclusion. I guess I focus more on inclusion rather than diversity. I know a lot of US tech companies that have, on paper, incredibly diverse organizations, people from different parts of the world, different, age. Well, not age is kind of an interesting one. We'll put that on the side for a second, but
It's just a number. It's just a number, and
gender
that's
and all
something
this
we
stuff.
should involve.
Yeah. So, so they may have all of these kind of cool statistics, but then you talk to the people and there's not much cognitive diversity. And so what I mean by that is that you end up hiring people that are very much similar to you. And there's not necessarily things wrong with that, but the downside of surrounding yourself by people who think the same way means that you end up most likely with groupthink. I can tell you that there are some Silicon Valley companies, and it makes me kind of laugh because I'll talk to some of the people here in the Singapore office, and they just sound like they're talking exactly the same. They're thinking the same way, and you wonder, does that create a little bit of tunnel vision, and does that put some blinders on that might prevent you from coming up with some new creative ideas? Inclusion is when you have diverse people, both based on nationality, based on those statistics. But I also think about cognitive diversity. Inclusion is figuring out how to get people who think, work, communicate differently. How do you then get them to collaborate? How do you get them to, instead of having those differences be barriers, how do you define that so that those differences actually turn into differentiators? And I think that inclusion is a much harder part in many ways to make work. I think that there's also a much bigger reward when you do make it work, because if you can get people who have profoundly different approaches to solving problems, if you can get those two to collaborate effectively, that's where you actually come up with some really new and different ideas that can be game changers. And that is easier said than done. But that's how I think about it. And I would probably put myself, if you were to ask me how I think about diversity and inclusion, I'm much more interested in inclusion. And I hopefully that doesn't have any accidental, hopefully that doesn't get taken out of context. But I think inclusion is such a fascinating concept. I mean, that I could spend the rest of my career focused on that and be happy, because there's always going to be new challenges to solve.
No, I think that's a good mindset actually. For one thing, is that if a company creates I think, there's a loose term for it, but the thing is that if a company can truly create an optimal inclusion environment, the other part will just fall along the line, and it creates a sort of synergy, I guess, in an office environment.
Yeah, I think that I know companies that have had some very big diversity push efforts, and that's a good start. But then they bring people in, but then it's like, but he really wasn't a fit with us, and it's like, well, okay, what does that mean? And is that because of that person, or is it because of what it is that you've created here? I like to think about company culture. I've heard this phrase. People say, we hire for a culture fit. And that always sends up a flag to me, because you go, well, okay, it sounds to me like you're looking to hire yourself again. And maybe they need to be a different color, but that still doesn't solve much problems. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think company culture, organizational culture, if you put it through like a growth mindset, it's how does this person add on to our company culture, not fit into and so that maybe is the difference between diversity and inclusion. You need both, but diversity doesn't really work or scale until you've figured out the inclusion piece of this. And it'd be interesting. I don't know. Do you think that places like Singapore, or or this region, are Are they better at that? Because you kind of said that, I don't know, where, like, do you think that the US is at I don't know, how do you think about like these different regions in terms of progress?
The thing is this. I grew up in Singapore for over
Yep.
17 years. I've loved the country as much as I would on my own birth country in Indonesia. I've never really actually felt any. I think if I want to call it, is that I've never felt any kind of negative impact. I guess since I've been fortunate enough
Hmm.
to have been born within as a Chinese Indonesian. So
Hmm.
in a sense, I've been able to be, if people view me, it's in a much more respectable situation, I guess. With regards to how the two countries have handled on diversity, I always feel that to implement it, I guess, on diversity and inclusion in a workplace, it is actually has to have one one guiding principle that could be flexible enough to be implemented with different approach to different mindsets.
Right.
So let's say we use different examples. Yeah, for example, people in the East, specifically, maybe we can use China. This individual, people in China has minimal interaction and maximum productivity. Whereas if you reach out to somebody from Spain, you will have to talk a lot
Right.
more
There's
on
more
trying to make
communication
the
costs.
exactly, yeah, communications cost. But at the same time, there has to be a flexible system in a sense that makes us know that when is it time for us to adjust our mindset. So let's say it is a big time project, so therefore let's try to get let's use the project management approach on being more agile, or we need to be able to create some kind of breathing room, so there's
Yep.
no need for you to always follow through with one culture's mindset. Is that
Yep.
because there are times whereby us, like for example, let's say we use another example is actually working industry. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, I think I rambled on a bit, but
No,
I
yeah, I think you're
think let
putting more
me try.
definition to the ideas of inclusion.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say we use a working environment better. So I've been one of my past guests, Vivek Iani, is a millennial expert. So he has told me before, you can't micromanage the millennial generation. Okay, what if, however, these groups of millennials enter the industry that whereby life is dependent on the line, maybe in food and beverage, military, in the hospital industry? Because the thing is that if they are not somebody who's always ready to handle the grind, they can't take it, and in the end what will
Right.
happen is that it
Right.
results in loss of life. However, there are industries like in an office setting, you don't need to be micromanaged every single time, 24 hours, 7 minutes, or there'll be somebody who's your superior calling you after office hours because they are worried. Because even if it's not done on time, nobody's gonna die. It's not gonna cost a life.
Mm,
So let's say when we use this as within the context, let's apply which culture is actually a lot more accessible, which
mm,
actually makes more sense. I
mm.
think that is, in a sense, an optimal situation that I hope to be projected.
One of the things I've been thinking about recently is with COVID and with more distributed teams working hybrid. I think a lot about power structures and hierarchies
Right.
in corporations. So a distributed team generally requires that hierarchy to flatten in many ways
Right.
because people are more distributed. They have to work more autonomously. There is more individual they have to be able to work on their own without being micromanaged.
Right.
So, and that is easier for some organizations than others. So I think the companies that adjusted easily with COVID were those that probably already had a flatter type of hierarchy. However, to your point, there are other times when there is massive change going on and everybody needs to work together, right? So so in other words, it's not just like a one-way street where all of a sudden now you're just autonomous and you can just do your own thing and get your work done all the time. In some cases, hierarchies are actually important and necessary. So I think part of the flexibility that we keep talking about, that's one of the most, it's an important word, but of course it gets overused. Talk about adaptation. I think that being able to adjust to both working autonomously, but also working collectively, which are two opposites of the coin, but that's the definition of flexibility, isn't it? Right? It's to be able to pivot when you need to. And I think that companies probably need to start doing a better job putting that definition together in terms of what's expected, when it's expected, what it's going to look like. And I don't know who that falls on. I guess that's a leadership challenge to be able to communicate that.
Funny enough, you mentioned on leadership, because that's actually going to be my next question, though. So, what do you feel, though, has been, let's say, maybe when you are trying to implement your program, what has been the highest resistance to you for changes? And sometimes, usually, this will definitely, people will say it's from the top, but maybe I can ask from your own experience on how you handle it.
I think bureaucracy is a very big barrier to change. And this goes back to the hierarchy concept as well. I do work with a lot of companies that are agile, and I'm smiling because I'll say agile in air quotes. They talk about being agile and they go through agile training, but then it doesn't work, or it kind of gets bucketed into this hierarchy as it is. So, it's like, oh, we're gonna put all of this structure in place, and then we're gonna say it's agile, and it's like it doesn't really do much of anything. And I think the reason from it. I mean, we have to do the buzzword, and now because we talk about agile, that somehow makes it so. That's just not the case. And I think oftentimes it's the bureaucracy that prevents these types of initiatives from actually being effective. And I think the same thing has happened in the COVID world, where companies would have people work from home, but they don't change the bureaucracy.
Right.
So they want the autonomy, but then they don't get rid of the red tape, that expression, which would be all of the paperwork and the processes. And in some industries, you have to have some of this from a safety requirement. In other cases, it really is legacy. And I think that it's absolutely I think that the next couple of years are going to be so interesting, where large organizations especially are going to need to rethink how they structure themselves. And I think what we're going to see is the attempt to go from a hierarchy where you think about like a family tree, right, of your branches and all this stuff, into more of a network system of small quasi-independent teams and modules where there are relationships and interdependencies, but you don't have to go up to the boss to get sign off. And that is a massive change across the board. And I think it requires leadership to be able to destroy bureaucracy. And bureaucracy will die hard, because destroying bureaucracy for many means losing power. And as history will tell us, people do not like to easily give up power, whether it's perceived or real.
I mean, it's written by the victors, so the systems were created by the people who benefit when the system was in place.
I think that I'm thinking about an organization here in Singapore. I won't name them, but it's just a large organization, and they have a very traditional hierarchy, as you'd expect. And with COVID, this is a perfect example. So each of these groups needs to report COVID tests before people come into the office. And the way the reporting structure works is that it has to get signed off from these different groups. And you go, well, wait a minute, that made sense 2 years ago when you had this routine that needed to be replicated exactly the same way time and time again. That's not what this is. You don't need that. That structure doesn't work for this problem. And
Exactly.
they're trying to fit a round peg into a square hole, and it creates so much additional bureaucracy. And so then, we'll go agile. It's like, well, you've got to destroy this stuff and rebuild it before you can just layer on a concept like agile.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting.
I actually read before we actually went live. I was reading an article by Harvard Business Review. One of the main issue of transitioning to like a less bureaucratic system is because there is a certain level of pride that was created from the very top. Like, for example, because a CEO would regard a company like an extension of themselves. It's like their firstborn child that somehow, some way is if their kids are working there, it's something that they prioritize more, or somebody like a wife or a second mistress or something. It's because it's something that is their own labor. It's something
It's
that they see
theirs.
as an extension of who they are. So to the point that when there's a change that has to be implemented to ensure its survival, it's not something that can be easily implemented. Is because this is what they've started with.
Yes,
It's something that has worked until now. So they have no guarantee if it will be working in the
correct.
future. I
I
guess this
think that
has
Yeah, I think that you've got to. Sorry to interrupt. I was just thinking that
no worries.
when you're talking that level of disruption, of change, that has to come from the top. In your example, that CEO has to let go. The kids have to. The kids are. It's the empty nest syndrome. You have to let the kids off to school, and they have to go and do their own thing. Now, with that said, how do you keep control over it? How do you keep control over it? And so there's that balancing act, because a total absence of control, total decentralization is chaos, right? It's got to have a give and take. And yeah, I do think about some processes that are repeatable. That's why hierarchies, that's why bureaucracy was created, which was, okay, this is all the Henry Ford stuff from 100 plus years ago. Let's break apart a process and let's make it so that it can scale very easily, because it is repeatable. It is this, we're doing the same action every single time. That's not what today is. We're not hiring, in many companies, you're not hiring people to be part of a factory making widgets anymore. Now it's different, diverse stuff, but yet we're still using the factory org structures from 120 years ago.
Oh, come
And
on.
I think
Really?
that COVID is going to possibly be the thing that forces that change.
Okay. Yeah. This is, I think, not only for yourself, Kyle. I think this is also if the audience is interested. There's a company called Ideo that I actually studied during my time in college. I actually did a thesis on them. They actually have a really unique system when they actually started, is because when they started a meeting, they will be a decentralized system. They kind of arrange the employees. Ideo is a company that that produce goods, I guess, goods manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened is that they actually have a system like what Merlin did for King Arthur, which is a round table of sorts. Is that there's no actual giant table; it's just people
Right.
sitting in a circle.
Yeah.
And every one of the employee come from a very diverse background. And what happened is that they actually, even the CEO, the company's founder, can actually be part of that circle, and they all are considered equal, so they can voice out their opinions, not to use vulgarities, to actually voice out their opinions on what they could do for their next upcoming project. only then when the meeting is done, then they decentralize it, and after that they are back to their original roles, and then they execute it as immediately. So I think this
Mm.
could be actually an interesting basis in a sense to incorporate inclusion. I guess it's because with bureaucracy, it comes with a system of people following the hierarchy. So as a result, they are not able to, because
Yes.
they are afraid if, let's say, they have
Yes.
said something wrong, or they may
Yep.
not address the founder, the company's founder, as who he is, and
Yep.
then everybody will be like, okay,
That's such
we're
a good
gonna listen to him.
example of it's such a good example of bureaucracy. There's a group here, another one where the top person came down and said, we're doing our employee reviews across the organization, and they went to the leaders of each of these groups and they said, you better get those scores up this year. Now think about the
Oh,
hierarchy. Think about that. What is it? What are they saying? You've got to get your scores up. So there's two ways to do it. There's
yeah,
the
they have
right
the
way,
pressure.
which is to improve culture, or do you just try and get the scores up, right? Are we studying to take the test, or are we studying to understand the core content?
Yeah.
And what this actually happened a couple of months ago, and some of the groups had 100% ranking, positive ranking. And that's just totally unrealistic, but that was what they were ordered to do. And that's just doesn't do anything. That's a perfect example of that fear that happens where you aren't allowed to speak honestly and report truth, rather than just tell this boss what, in this case, he wants to hear.
Kyle? All right. Let's just wrap it up with this line. I actually always want to end the show with gratitude. Yeah? So I want to ask is that what has been the ultimate blessing pertaining to your life as a global citizen? And what downsides would you want to share with some of the people who are watching this, or they could be reading your book, that they need to look out for, so that it doesn't, also, even if they did get into that kind of predicament, it's something that they can work upon to improve.
I think that I love the fact that there are so many differences that are out there, and it almost makes you you almost approach different foreign settings with as a kid again, because you have no idea what's going on, and so to be able to have to figure out and decode and solve these problems is actually pretty exciting, as long as you have a positive mindset towards it. And so I love working across the world on campaigns, because you just don't know what you're going to stumble into and then have to figure that out. So that actually energizes me, rather than routines that can get a little bit tedious sometimes. I think the downside is that the downside, certainly, of living on the other side of the planet is that the sacrifice that you do make, and that is friends and family back home. That lifestyle, that mindset, is not for everybody, and so you've got to be willing to do that trade-off. And I think that for some, it's a worthwhile trade-off. It's not always easy, and it can be very painful, especially when borders get locked down. But today, of all times, with video communication, it's a hell of a lot easier today than it was even 10 years ago. But for the rest of history, we are in the renaissance of global communication. Certainly from a technology standpoint, the technology is there. Now the people just have to catch up to it, and that's the challenge, and that's what keeps things interesting. So I'll leave it at that for now. That's the quest that we are all on as we leave our nights at the round table and go back into battle.
And now we fight on Zoom. We can use
Yes,
Discord.
now we do battle on Zoom.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Carl. So yeah, for those of you who are watching, I actually just want to end with a thank you to some of those who are watching. So Eugene, thank you for leaving a like, and Megan, who actually leave a like on my announcement page and will be tuning it later. She is living in the Eastern time in the United States, so that's still 15 hours behind, if I'm not mistaken. So. Uh, Other than that, I actually just last but definitely not least, I want to thank Kyle for making the time to come here today. Apologies for the network error. While this is well, while technology has been improving and has been pivotal to our life, at the same time, it can be a little pain in the ass.
Very true.
Since
Very true.
yeah,
Very true. Thank
Kyle,
you. Thank
anything
you
you?
for having me. No, I
Most
just
welcome.
appreciate you having me and getting. I've got two third culture kids in the next room who need entertaining. So that's my adventure for this afternoon.
Good luck, my friend. Oh, do you mind showing your book? Actually, is I can see it from the back here. Do you mind putting it to the front so that we can
Happen
promote
to
the Accidental Business Nomad?
happen. There it is.
Yep, there we go. Guys, just to let you guys know, Kyle's e-poster is actually designed based on the cover of the book. I really like it, so I actually that's the inspiration for it. And yeah, do reach out to him. Some of his social media and LinkedIn is already located in the description box. And of course, do catch the book. And if you are trying to expand your company overseas, do reach out to Kyle. And other than that, do take care of yourselves, everybody, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day or night or your afternoon. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Calvin.